You're listening to KYRS Medical Lake Spokane, 88.1 and 92.3 on your FM dial. Coming to you now, it's Long Waves with Gary Krug. I'd like to say right at the beginning of today's show, as I always do, that the opinions expressed on this show are solely my own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or beliefs of KYRS, its staff, management, or its underwriters. So welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I'm a little bit fuzzy, late flight last night, but I'm going to try and stagger through this show and hold it together. I wanted to talk today about the origin of desire and how needs become requirements. I know usually I focus on one issue in the news, but this cuts across so many issues for me that I really felt like I needed to address it and dive into what are some of the consequences of living in the sort of world in which we live. I was reading a piece by on Global Research by John Cozy, spelled with a K. And as one of the examples in his piece, he was discussing health care around the world as an issue of caring, as an issue of caring about people in the world. And he talked about, he writes about how in 1889, Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany started the world's first Social Security program, which was designed by actually a very conservative fellow named Otto von Bismarck. And the Kaiser was concerned that workers who were too old or who were invalided or who had been injured on the job had a, quote, well-grounded claim to care from the state. And Cozy's right. How reactionary. Imagine a Kaiser caring about the well-being of workers. And then he points out that in 1935, the U.S. basically copied the German program and got Congress to act on it. So 1889 for Germany, 1935 for America, and let's not forget how many industrialists and conservatives in the U.S. fought tooth and nail against the old age social insurance program that we now come to rely on. But what happened in between? What happened in between 1889 and 1935? Well, New Zealand created the first universal health care system between 1939 and 1941. The United Kingdom, 1948, Sweden, 1955, Iceland and Norway, 1956. These are universal health care systems, right? Not old age pensions. Universal health care. Iceland and Norway, 1956. Denmark, 1961. Finland, 1964. Japan, 1961. Canada, between 1968 and 72. The Soviet Union, 1969. Australia, 1974 and 1984. Italy, 1978, Portugal, Greece, Spain, Korea, Taiwan, Israel, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany, Luxembourg, blah, 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 blah. Universal health care. Universal health care. And now Obama has given us his reform of private health insurance, which apparently to some people suggests that universal health care is unnecessary, and as John Cozy points out, America is once again leading from behind. He goes on to say, quote, "These examples provide evidence for the assertion often inaccurately attributed to Winston Churchill that, quote, Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing after they have exhausted all the other possibilities. But things are really much worse than that. excuse me, when Americans set out to do the right thing, I'm continuing the quote, they often do it so badly and so ineffectively that the pathos of the human condition is hardly improved at all. Right? So healthcare in America is hugely poorly distributed. Many people don't get health care at all. And even if you do have good health care, not every physical ailment is covered. A lot of communities don't have even one doctor. And others have vision and hearing. Right? Dental is not covered for a lot of people in most insurance plans, not even Medicare. But do we need this? Why do people, especially the elderly, need to see, hear, or chew? Cozy asks. Making the world a better place is not an American forte. And he asks the question, how the Romans would resolve these sorts of issues. Cui bono, who benefits? And he says, well, let's turn that around. Who suffers? For instance, when an elderly person whose hearing is impaired is denied a hearing aid, who benefits? Anyone at all? When someone unemployed is denied unemployment compensation, does anyone benefit? When a family with little or no income is denied nutritional assistance, who benefits? Denying the ill medical care, who benefits? Who benefits if homeless people stay homeless? Who benefits when a school child is denied a lunch? And he says, does anyone benefit? Yet who suffers is obvious, isn't it? Helping no one and making many suffer is merely cruel, and being cruel is a moral fault. America and many other places, he continues, are not people countries. They do not exist for the welfare of the people. Making the world a better place is not something people easily do. And he continues this argument through a range of issues and returns, as we so often do, to the Middle East. The Western world, he writes, is at war with most of the nations in the Middle East, North Africa, and is promoting war in Ukraine. The Sunnis are now even being encouraged to kill other Sunnis. How can it possibly end well when the Kurds, who are being encouraged to kill Sunnis too, and who live in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, want to form a nation of their own, Kurdistan, and Turkey objects? Who is the West going to support? Will there be no end to this killing? Is any human being's life anywhere made better by all this killing? End of quote. And that's a very excellent question, because for all of the tough talk about all the good things the United States does around the world, very few people actually benefit from it. Remember, we were going into Iraq, and we were going to make Iraq a better place. We were going to bring the blessings of democracy. The war would last 3 months, 4, maybe, I doubt 6, said Rumsfeld. And we've turned Iraq into a flaming hellhole. There's a reason why these things keep going off the tracks. There's a reason why these lunatic schemes of our lords and masters in the White Houses and state houses around the world keep missing the point, keep missing the target. There is a kind of madness to what they do. And this is what I want to get to the roots of in today's show. The problem at one level is that complex systems like government and like ideologies of managing require that the people who are doing these things distill reality into simpler forms so they can manage it and use it, so they can make little models of it. Now, it doesn't matter if these little models never work, because there's a solution for that, and they always come up with the same one. It needs more managing. Right? If your managerial system isn't achieving the ends you want, you just obviously need either more managers or better managers. But my concern is what happens when people are transformed into things that need managing. I remember a friend of mine at a place where I once worked who, when the Human Resources Office changed its name to Human Resources Management, she drew herself up and said, "I am not a resource and I will not be managed." And that's a really good first step. Let me see if I can give a better example of what I'm trying to talk about here. We live in a world of images. We live in a world where most of what we understand of the world is represented through images. On the television, in movies, and on the news, wherever we look, on pornography, wherever we look, we have images of and about the world. But these images come out of systems which manufacture them, and they take on the qualities of those systems. The evening news is a kind of pornographic journalism. The news that we get is to journalism as porn is to love. And we might as well call the news porn, because it is. I frequently resort to calling things porn to get across this point. Most of the movies are porn. Not that they show graphic sexuality, but that they distill the world into oversimplified images and then represent it as either reality or some kind of desirable fantasy. So lots of people can go off and imagine they're in the Avengers or identify with the American Sniper, but it's porn. Part of the problem is that when we reduce things to images and constructs, we give them value, but we take away the essence of what the thing is. Value replaces everything. It replaces love. It replaces people. It replaces decency. It replaces care. We convert everything into a value, and this is an inflection that comes directly from our corporatist reality. If you can't put a value on it, why should anyone care? What's the value of this? And we confuse care and value in some interesting ways that I'll get to in a little bit. But the most significant thing that happens when we transform people into, we transform men and women into these abstract groups, or we say, oh, these are Sahel people in the Sahel, or these are Afghans, or these are Muslims, or these are whatever they are. We stripped from it a very interesting way of thinking that's been with us for quite a while. It was articulated by Socrates, by Aristotle, by Ficino, by Keats. And this is the idea of the good, the true, and the beautiful. The agathon, the aletheis, the kailon. And these were transcendent qualities. These were qualities that were essential in understanding the relationships between things in the world and the relationship between people and things. So, from the good, for instance, from the agathon, from that particular category, we have the relationship between knowledge and the thing known. What is the relationship between the knowledge I have and the thing that I know? This is essentially the basis of ethics, a reflection on what do I know? What do I do? Is it good? Is it true? Is it making things better? Is it beautiful? Yet we transform all of this into values and needs. Love and humanity, right, are a relation that people can have to the other. But this quality of relationship is destroyed. Whoa. This quality of relationship is destroyed when we convert people into things, into values and needs. Commitment becomes making a decision. Questions become problems. I got to work this problem here. It's not, I wonder what's going on here. Commitment. Am I really into this? Let me decide. No. You're in or you're not. I mean, look at how this has transformed our thinking. Asking in the U.S., as we are so fond to do, about our values. Everybody likes to talk about values. Family values. Christian values. Civic values. All this talk about values displaces the idea of the good, which is not about what is the value of it. Do you value your wife? I mean, that's an obscene question. That is an obscene question. One may love one's wife or one's husband or one's partner. But to reduce that to a value displaces the idea of the good. It displaces the idea of love. We no longer ask questions like, are we good? We ask, is it efficient? Are our actions good? We ignore our failures and move past them as if they never happened. Iraq wasn't our fault. Libya wasn't our fault. Afghanistan, not our fault. All those dead Americans, not our fault. All those dead children, again, not our fault. We just displace it all, move past it, without ever coming back to this question of what is the good? What is the right thing to do? And based on what? A rational calculus about if we do this and these countries are destroyed, then the power will shift and we will make more money. Now, I doubt if anyone in the world would support wars if politicians spoke in these terms. Yet it is the truth. It is the truth. Have better instruments. Have better instruments become an end that we never question? Oh, we need better weapons, we need better tactics, we need better whatever. Have the instruments become a means to an end that we never raise the question of good about? Necessity, oh yes. Wars are always necessary for the systems. They're necessary for the capitalists. They're necessary for us now because the empire cannot support itself without the ruinous expense of a military-industrial complex into which the government pours borrowed money to sustain. Meanwhile, back on the ranch, look around. Our infrastructure is collapsing. We can't fund schools. We can't fund health care. And where we can, an enormous part of the political spectrum would be quite happy to dismiss schools and health care and assistance and, I guess, infrastructure too. The Bobby Jindals, the Brownbacks, these people. And questioning, we want to turn into action. And this goes to the heart of our national disease. Action over thought. Action over reason. Be decisive. Act now. Decisiveness. Now, there are some good things to be said about decisiveness. One of them is that it is a great force wielded by the neocons and the neo-libs in the world. They act decisively. I remember Cy Hirsch, I think it was, quoting one of the Bush administration, who said, "You journalists, you're running around trying to explain what we're doing and trying to track it. We're creating reality as we go." Listen to the hubris in that. We're creating reality, and you're following along behind, and by the time you catch up, we will have moved into creating another reality. They really believe this. They really believe this. I'm not a church-going man. But this is one of the most blasphemous things I've ever heard in my life. We are creating reality. And they believe this nonsense. The Victoria Newlands who go into Ukraine believe this nonsense. We can create a new country. We can create freedom because we're the masters of the universe. We have the power. And thus they may act without regard to the good and without regard to any knowledge beyond the instrumental that they need to bring about the destruction they seek to bring about. They're very good at blowing things up. They can't build things worth a damn. And they can't build things worth a damn because they have no lived connection with the world. They're ideologues. And ideologues are like people who think TV news is real. They know what they know. It can't be questioned. It can't be challenged. You can't do anything with it except destroy. You can move forward with this very rigid sensibility, which transforms whole nations, whole populations, millions and millions of people, dead, displaced, maimed. The planet going to hell, while these clowns, the Victoria Newlands, the John Kerrys, the Barack Obamas, and all of their minions, are running around talking about more wars. War with China. Ooh. War with Russia. Ooh. What would that be like? Syria. We don't like the ruler in Syria, so we call him names. And we then pay people who a year ago we were calling an existential threat to the United States. We give them money and weapons and facilitate money and weapons going to them so they can destroy this bad guy, so-called. We did the same thing in Tripoli. That's what happened to Gaddafi. Now, Gaddafi was no saint, but he also held the damn country together, and the people were pretty happy, and it was a prosperous place with high education, good standards, as does Iran now, which is why we've got to blow it up too, I guess. Ukraine, all of these countries that we go and knock over, and when we do succeed in actually knocking out a government without destroying the entire country, we almost always put in a ruthless despot who makes the place infinitely worse than it was before. And then the government lies and says, this is freedom. Well, we've got democracy. No, there was democracy before the Shah of Iran. There was democracy before Pinochet, not after. Not after Allende was removed and Pinochet became the president. Not after Mossadegh was removed and the Shah became the king, the Shah of Iran. Not after we left Libya a smoking hole, which people are so desperate to get out of that they drown by the hundreds weekly trying to escape to Europe, and Europe has no idea what to do with these refugees. Notice, they're not people. They're refugees. This is systems thinking. You reduce human beings to bits of a system, and then you decide what are the requirements of these people and what are the requirements of the system and what is your throughput. But you're not talking about people anymore. And that changes the game completely. I mean, back to Heidegger's idea. Essentially what we do is turn the world into a resource. So we don't see the world as world. We don't see people as people. We don't see mountains as mountains. We don't see rivers as rivers. We see these as resources. And this breaks the world. It destroys a relationship with the world. When we turn people into numbers, when we turn people into these abstract groups, we break them. Our whole relationship changes. There are no longer questions of good or true or beautiful. There's simply questions of managing the system. So we convert the mountains of West Virginia into coal. We convert British Columbia into a toxic sludge dump. We convert the oceans into food supplies. And then we treat these as if they will run forever, because that is the logic of the particular kinds of systems we use, which are capitalist systems. You're going to extract everything you can from this resource. Even if you destroy the resource, even if you destroy everything around it, well, that's an externality, so let's not worry about it. But extract everything you can, regardless of the outcome. And this is why we're getting these dire reports from all over the world regarding the imminent collapse, the imminent and probably unavoidable collapse of civilization, and possibly even the extinction of human beings, possibly in as short a time as 3 human lives, 3 generations. Because if we disrupt the world's systems, if we disrupt the complexity of the world, the interrelatedness of species and species, if we destroy the necessity of the world being allowed to be world, which is a thing we understand not at all, so let's break it. If we take all of that away, the world dies. Our food stocks go. The water goes. The air goes. It gets really hot. We turn countries, places where human beings live, places where men and women, I don't want to say human beings, even that's kind of system talking, places where men and women and children live, boys and girls. We turn them into economics. We turn them into strategic values. Oh, there's a strategic value in destroying Libya. That is so obscene. That is so grotesquely immoral to even hold that idea. It burns my tongue to say it. This is a depraved way of thinking, but it's characteristic of capitalistic and technicistic thought. And technicism actually has a precise meaning. Manfred Stanley wrote a book back in the, late 70s, early 80s on technology. And he described technicism as the inappropriate use of technological thought or metaphor or description in places where it does not fit or belong. So this describing the world as a technological system, an ecosystem, it is not an ecosystem. It is a complex interrelation and symbiosis of all of these things that have being in the world, plants and animals and insects and bacteria and viri, all of these things. And to disrupt any part of that is to risk unraveling the whole thing. And as I said before, we know nothing whatsoever, relatively speaking, about how the world actually is. We're too busy transforming it into resources that we can then exploit. And then we have need for managers and ideologues ideologues who will tell us what is important to do because they have right thinking, and managers who will run the systems. Let me see if I can put this on a finer point. There was one of the very rare interviews with Ivan Illich was conducted by David Calley for the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. And he's asked, Calley asks Illich about care, and particularly about living in systems. And Illich says, when people speak to me about the needy, I answer that's none of my business. I don't care for them. Putting very specific stress on the word care. The needy, for whom I ought to care, I leave to philanthropists or politicians. I would like to act as a Samaritan picking up a beaten-down Jew, as a Palestinian who picks up his Jew. But I do not intend to care for the needy. When I speak about this, when I say I don't care for the needy, people say to me, but what about the people who are dying of hunger at this moment in Ethiopia? When I answer that I don't care about them, they immediately began to speak about basic caloric requirements, or even worse, they give me a list of basic requirements without which their life can't go on. This happens more and more to me. 10 years ago, people still answered me by saying, think of the hungry. Well, now the Ethiopians are no longer hungry. They're human individuals whose most fundamental existential requirements have not been met. The moment you begin to think about the hungry in terms of calories, in your own fantasy, you become a systems administrator. You become someone who feels that he has the power, or at least ought to have the power, to turn lifelines off and on, because he who can turn them on can also, by not doing what he ought to do, turn them off. The fantasy that Ethiopians are dependent on what we send them implies a tremendous vanity. I cease to think in terms of the individual hungry mouth into which a piece of bread may enter, and begin to speak in terms of tons, without my necessarily having either the intention or the capacity to take a piece of bread and share it with somebody else. And this happens in a society in which hospitality has become well nigh impossible. Continuing with Illich here. Here in the North, in America and Canada, we live in a society where you can occasionally put up somebody at home when he comes through to give a lecture or he's on a trip. But compare this with what you see all over the Third World, where it is quite normal that a household accommodate guests who stay for years. The old remain there. The children come back there. The divorced girl or the girl who went into prostitution and now has to cure herself of syphilis comes home as a matter of course. Compare this with a world in which not even obvious hospitality for old people is offered, and huge economic problems are created by the frightening prospect, as people see it, that by the time I reach 85, there will be 5 times as many people of 85 as there are today. So what do? We speak about managing requirements, survival requirements. And this brings about what Illich calls a catastrophic breakdown of one way of seeing things as they are. I mean, if you think about care for a minute, he says he doesn't care. He does not care. And he has an excellent point. We do not and should not care about the poor. We should not act like systems managers, life systems analysts. We shouldn't do this because it breaks the relationship we should have with them. I can love the person who stands before me. I can't love in the abstract. I can't have a relationship with the abstract. I can't put bread into the mouth of the hungry. I can help the person who is, for me, still a person. And they don't even have to be present. The idea is not throwing that switch to turn people into systems. It brings about, to do so, brings about a corruption of language, and it brings about a corruption of the heart. Let's look at it, think about it in a different example here for a minute. Think about it in the sense of people killed by U.S. military strikes overseas, bombings, artillery, drones. Literally, millions and millions and millions of human beings wiped out. I'm just going to talk about ours. I know other people kill too, but I want to talk about ours. The ones that the country of which I am a part is responsible. Talk about a lack of care. We don't care about victims, but we shouldn't care about our victims. We shouldn't be giving blood money in compensation for the injured and the dead. This is not care. What is the appropriate thing to feel? It's not care. It is horror. It is revulsion. It is sadness in the depth of your heart that you must feel. It is the feeling that forces you to change the way you are or pretend to care. So a lot of this care stuff, it's a Band-Aid. It covers up. We can only love those we know as people. Disgust, horror, shock. I have very little to say about disgust and horror and shock. They are literally unspeakable. But in the systems, we keep pretending the map is the territory. We make the old mistake pointed out by Korzybski in general linguistics theory, where we confuse our mapping of the world into an abstract system with the world itself. And there's a beautiful Borges story on the same topic. But it's not the world. The numbers of population on maps do not bleed. They do not suffer. They do not die. They do not hunger. They do not laugh. They do not make love. They're numbers. And they are not people. Our victims. I'm so disgusted when I look at the news and I see how many people killed in a drone strike wherever, or tallies of people. I really cannot care. I can be horrified. I can be sick. But to say I care is hypocrisy. If it happened in front of me, I could care for them. Just as the map is not the territory, the image is not the real. The images that we have of the world. You look at how many kids are learning that pornography and the relations on pornography are sex. And we can all say, oh, that's really weird and creepy and destructive. But why can't we do the same thing with news? Why can't we do the same thing with our films, with our TV? Why can't we? Say, oh, wow, you watch how many hours of sport And you think that's real? You watch how many hours of sitcoms or drama shows, and it influences our understandings of the world. It transforms real problems, real issues into cute little 30-minute or 47-minute or 54-minute vignettes. But it doesn't ever give us the real. And I know people can tell the difference between TV and reality sometimes. But if you look at the stunning lack of intelligence or knowledge on the simplest issues in this country, something like 1 in 10 people in this country can't name the vice president. Okay, Biden's pretty forgettable in a lot of ways, but they can't name the vice president. They have no idea what government is. They don't care what government is. And yet they have this strange support for a military empire, because that they can feel. That they can feel. And that's been so wonderfully engineered, so horribly engineered by systems managers who are very good at making people feel things and believe things. Half the people in this country think Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. They believe it. They believe they were found. We don't have any memory. But what we do, we look at the world and we say, oh, there is a need for democracy here. There is a need for food here. There is a need for so many tons of caloric input. These things are needed. And the needs of strangers become the requirements of strangers. Again, systems thinking. And this very much changes how we feel toward the world. It teaches us to transform our own feelings, our own desires, into the needs of others. So the needs of strangers then become the requirements of strangers. The needs of the poor become the requirements of the system. And that's how we deal with it. That's how we expect a solution will come. But it never does. Have we eliminated poverty? Have we eliminated hunger? Even in our own country. And people aren't even trying to do that anymore. A lot of people have just given up on that whole project. You're just hungry because you want to be. They've taken this very spiteful-minded attitude. And whenever you see that kind of spite and unconscious anger and hatred and lashing out at a people over something as simple as food or wanting to share the space or breathe your air or whatever, you've always got to look, not terribly deeply, but you've always got to look for an emotional or unconscious manifestation. Something's going on inside of them that they really need to think about, examine, consider. They need to ethically reflect on their life, their position, their thoughts, their feelings, and say, whoa, why am I doing this? I need to have some knowledge about why I have these feelings. But it's easier to double down on the feelings. There's another side to this problem, and that is the whole world being bound up with these dehumanizing images and these dehumanizing concepts and this perverse language out of systems thinking, this dehumanizing and breaking of the real, this accidenting of the real, as Paul Virilio calls it. Because of this, we never actually have time for philos, for this responsibility that we have to people around us just because they are people. I've talked about philos on the show before. But philos is that when the stranger shows up at your door, you attend the strangers. You help the stranger. Right? What do you need? Do you need food? Do you need a place to stay? What do you need? We don't have time for that because we're so bound up. And this affects us on so many levels. It affects us socially. It affects us in our attitudes toward politics and government. We can't afford things that most other people in the world have. Time, caring, genuine sociability. You know, the funny thing, you go to an American bar, an American pub, there's always a lot of loud music blaring. Often it's hard to talk at all. Or if you do talk, you can yell a few amoeba words at each other, little Lego words. You can yell these back and forth and kind of click them into things and pretend they mean something. But you go anywhere else in the world, and yes, you can find loud American-style bars, but what you commonly find are quiet little places where you can sit and talk. A lot of pubs I've visited in Australia, Scotland, the UK didn't have a TV, didn't have a jukebox. Might have a radio, but it was seldom on. You were expected to talk, or to play dominoes, or just to sit quietly and enjoy the company of other people. We don't have time for that. We don't. But instead, we busy ourselves. We have time in our lives carved out by the system for us. Time for sports, time for work, time for appropriate leisure activities, if we are so inclined, time for exercise. We have times for all of these carved out. Where is the time carved out for us by this system of civic duty, civic service, care of others? Where is this carved out? It's not. In fact, it's actually made difficult for us. We think a lot about our own needs, but they're not even our needs. We live in what René Girard once called a mimetic system of desire. We have mimetic. We copy other people's desire. We see other people who have things, and we go, "Oh, I want some of that too." I want some of that too. And so the good, which is what we should desire, becomes a value which we see in other people, and is something we need or choose or pick because we see somebody else has it, and then we want it. We see the bigger house, we want it. That's how this whole system of envy that drives consumerist capitalism works. And it is a system of envy. It's what drives conspicuous consumption. Why else would conspicuous consumption be a status issue for us? But it is. One's needs are the result of attributing them to another and saying, "I want that too." We desire that. Now, take that as an exemplar of our system. Is it not understandable that the GCHQ and the NSA and the CIA and the EIEIO need our information. They need our Facebook. They need our personal details. And not for any practical end, not because they're actually going to use it for any practical purpose or solve crimes or stop terrorism or anything, but because we live in a system where even the systems are built around this desire for something someone else has, and the system must possess it. The system creates a mimetic desire that is mimetic of people's envying others. We see this in the ideologies of the neoconservatives and the neoliberals. And these are not philosophical positions. They're not economic theories. They're ideologies. They are techniques for operating in systems. They are closed technical operation manuals. So the neocons, the neolibs, there's not a dime's difference between them. And now, I mean, they've come to a very happy marriage, a copula, in the Obama White House, where they speak slightly different language, but they share exactly the same ideology. The world is a system. People are inside that system. Their job is to manage us so that they can do their job. This is McNamara from the Vietnam War. This is the bubble of propaganda and belief in the U.S., where every major paper, every major news organization plays the company song. But these ideologies degrade law because they're above the law. They're creating reality. Why has no one gone to jail for torture? Why has no one gone to jail for the invasion of Iraq? Why has no one gone to jail? Why has Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright not gone to jail for the deaths of 1 million Iraqi children, which they caused through their orders, through their ideology? It was worth it, said Madeleine Albright. Well, not to the Iraqis it wasn't. And what did we gain from this? It's easy to see. I mean, back to Cozy's argument, it's easy to see who loses, but who gained anything? And yet they keep pretending if they do the game differently with more managers or better tools, that somehow the outcome's going to be different. But in point of fact, they're not even concerned with the outcome. Their concern is the system. Hence, in Orwell, in 1984, the wars will never end. The wars are not being fought to win. The wars are being fought to be continual. There is no end to the system. If the wars ended, the systems would have no reason to exist. And as I said, it's because we are individually locked into a lot of consumerist activities and time and finances, and because we're captives to our debt, we're slaves to it, including virtually every child who emerges from a university these days, which is a great scam. Wonderful way to keep people obedient. No, you will put your nose down, you will work, you will give us part of it, or we will put you in jail. And I understand why no one much likes politics or government. Ordinary people are excluded from participating in these expert systems. You know, when Jen Psaki at a news conference a couple of months ago said the U.S. has a long-standing tradition that we do not practice, we do not condone the change of other governments through extra-legal mechanisms or violence. And the entire room of journalists burst into incredulous laughter with one of them saying, whoa, wait. How long-standing is this? Because, of course, everybody who knows anything about history can reel off at least 20 of the countries that the U.S. single-handedly has knocked off. Some of them got better, some of them didn't. And we are excluded from these systems. And because we are also excluded through our consumerism, through our holidays and work and meals and sports, we never actually get involved and participate in civic activities. We don't volunteer we don't run for the school board. We don't volunteer to work in city government or in state government. There are lots of things people could do if it were organized, but that would actually get people involved, and that would have a possibility of changing things. System guarantees that there is no power to oppose it. It doesn't even recognize us as men and women or as citizens. It recognizes us as something in the system, things to be managed. I'd like to conclude very briefly with just mentioning a bit from John Ralston Saul, and this is about what's actually required of us to begin to think differently. Now, I hinted at some of this in the quote from Illich, Ivan Illich, and that was, as I say, from the David Cowley book, Illich in Conversation. But John Saul writes, "It seems to me that a sensible list of human qualities would run as follows: common sense, creativity or imagination, ethics, not morality, intuition or instinct, memory, and finally, reason." He goes on at some length to talk about that, but these are the key characteristics that we require to even begin thinking about our world, to begin to think about how we move out of these systems. And you notice the focus of these is to shift it back to us, to quit taking the system's logic and relying on it as a way of freeing ourselves, because that'll never work. Saul continues, "The quality that corporatism claims as its own is rationality. The practical effects on the individual are passivity and conformism in the areas that matter, and nonconformism in areas that don't." And doesn't that just sum up life in the American empire? Well, I'd better get out of here and go home and eat some apple pie. Thank you for listening. This has been Long Waves Radio with Gary Krug, broadcasting, as always, on KYRS Medical Lake, Spokane, 88.1, 92.3 FM. You can write me, longwaves@kyrs.org. Find me on Facebook, Long Waves Radio, and you can listen to podcasts of the show on YouTube. Look for Long Waves Radio, 3 separate words, in quotes, and you'll pop me right up. Thank you again for listening. I look forward to being back on next week. I'm not going to see you, but you'll hear me. And until then, stay smart, stay human. Think. I'm gone.